My friends, the Detroit Lions may have just lost more than a player in free agency, and a lot of fans are starting to realize how frustrating the NFL's compensatory pick system can really be. DJ Reader signing with the New York Giants is not just another offseason move flying under the radar. This situation could actually leave Detroit empty-handed when it comes to future draft compensation, and honestly, that's where the conversation gets interesting because the timing of the move matters almost as much as the player himself. Once the NFL draft passes, the compensatory formula changes completely. Any free agents signed after that point no longer count toward the formula that awards teams extra draft picks. That means Detroit potentially loses a veteran contributor like DJ Reader and gets absolutely nothing back in return from the compensatory system. From the Giants' perspective, this was smart business. They waited, saw how the draft unfolded, evaluated the roster, and then made the move. But from the Lions' side, fans are left wondering whether the current system actually punishes teams that develop and lose talent later in the offseason. And this is exactly why many people around the league believe the NFL needs to adjust the rule. Veteran players often wait until after the draft because they want clarity. They want to know where opportunities exist, where the snaps are available, and where they can compete immediately. So when a player signs late, teams losing those veterans can suddenly get no benefit at all. Detroit may be learning that lesson the hard way right now. At the same time, the Lions are clearly still looking at ways to strengthen this roster before training camp fully ramps up. There's growing discussion about whether Detroit should add another veteran pass rusher, and two names continue surfacing around the organization: Clelin Ferrell and Jadeveon Clowney. Clelin Ferrell is not being viewed as a superstar addition. Nobody is expecting him to come in and suddenly become the face of the defense. That's not the point anymore. What Detroit appears to be searching for now are rotational contributors, reliable depth pieces who can give this defensive line extra pressure packages throughout the season. Ferrell finished last year with 4 sacks and 13 solo tackles, and while those numbers won't shock anyone, the bigger value comes from experience and flexibility within the rotation. The Lions already have their primary pieces in place defensively. Aiden Hutchinson remains the centerpiece of the pass rush, and Detroit clearly believes in the younger talent they've continued bringing into the roster, but depth matters over a long NFL season, especially when injuries begin stacking up late in the year. That's where a player like Ferrell becomes interesting. He would likely come at a relatively affordable price, and Detroit still has enough cap flexibility to make a move happen if they truly want additional reinforcements. Then there's Jadeveon Clowney, and this conversation feels even more fascinating because it directly challenges what Detroit has been trying to build this offseason. The Lions have made it obvious they want to get younger across the roster. Younger, faster, more developmental upside. That philosophy has been visible almost everywhere on the team. Clowney, however, is already 33 years old, and that naturally creates hesitation. But when you really break it down, the argument for Clowney is not about long-term investment. It's about maximizing a Super Bowl window right now. Detroit doesn't necessarily need another full-time starter. They need more bodies capable of consistently pressuring quarterbacks. Rotational edge players become incredibly important when you're trying to survive deep playoff runs. Fresh pass rushers in December and January can completely change games. And if the Lions could land Clowney on a short-term, lower-risk contract somewhere around $5 or $6 million, it suddenly becomes a very realistic discussion, especially because the Lions still have workable cap space available even after accounting for rookie contracts. The financial side of this is not impossible at all. What makes this entire situation more compelling is that Detroit's defensive line suddenly starts looking legitimately dangerous if another veteran piece is added. Imagine Hutchinson continuing to lead the front while younger players develop behind him, combined with another experienced rotational pass rusher entering the mix. That creates waves of pressure, and defensive coordinators love having options like that over a full season. Meanwhile, Terrion Arnold is also becoming one of the biggest talking points around the team internally, because his development could completely change the ceiling of this secondary. Arnold recently spoke about the intensity of training camp, and one thing that stood out immediately was how seriously he seems to be approaching his growth as a professional. He talked about how difficult it is, not just physically, but mentally, to maintain elite intensity for hours every single day against top NFL talent. What's especially important is how Arnold described learning directly from the offense, particularly from players like Jared Goff. That matters more than people realize. Young defensive backs improve faster when veteran quarterbacks challenge them mentally. Understanding route concepts, timing, leverage, tendencies, all of that comes from competing against experienced offensive players daily in practice. The physical talent has never really been the biggest question surrounding Arnold. The bigger concern has always been discipline and consistency, avoiding unnecessary penalties, staying composed, not becoming overly handsy in coverage. Those small details separate good corners from reliable starting corners in the NFL, and Detroit seems to believe Arnold has the mentality needed to overcome those issues. There's confidence inside the organization that his mental toughness is strong enough to handle adversity. The challenge now becomes putting everything together physically and mentally over a full season while staying healthy. Injuries have already been part of the conversation surrounding him, and durability is going to become one of the biggest factors in determining how high his ceiling truly is. The Lions are entering a fascinating phase right now because this roster feels close. Not perfect, but close. That's why every single veteran addition, every cap decision, and every young player development story suddenly feels magnified. One extra pass rusher could matter. One breakout from a young cornerback could matter. One missed compensatory pick could matter later when roster depth becomes critical. And honestly, that's what makes this offseason feel so important for Detroit. They are no longer rebuilding. They are managing expectations that now include legitimate championship pressure. So the question becomes, should the Lions aggressively add another veteran like Jadeveon Clowney or Clelin Ferrell before the season starts? Or should they trust the young talent already developing inside this roster? The biggest reason this question keeps coming back around Detroit is because the Lions are no longer in a position where good enough satisfies anybody anymore. The expectations have completely changed around this franchise. Fans are not looking at this team hoping for progress. They're looking at this roster and thinking about playoff positioning, NFC dominance, and whether this group can finally take the final step. That changes how every roster decision gets evaluated, and when you look deeper into the defensive line specifically, it becomes clear why adding another veteran edge rusher still makes so much sense despite all the young talent already present. Detroit has invested heavily in building depth, but depth only matters if those players can consistently produce pressure when games become physical late in the season. The Lions already understand how brutal a full NFL schedule becomes once injuries begin piling up, especially in the trenches. You can never have enough pass rushers in today's league. That's why the idea of bringing in someone like Jadeveon Clowney refuses to disappear. Even at 33 years old, the value would not necessarily come from expecting superstar production every single week. It would come from situational impact, veteran awareness, rotational explosiveness, knowing how to attack offensive tackles in critical moments. Those little details become incredibly important during playoff football when possessions are limited and quarterbacks punish every mistake. The Lions also appear to understand that their current championship window cannot be wasted. Aiden Hutchinson is becoming one of the premier defensive players in football, and Detroit knows they need to maximize the years where he's dominating games at the highest level. Adding another experienced pass rusher opposite him, even in a rotational role, could help keep Hutchinson fresher throughout the season, while also preventing offenses from focusing all their protection schemes toward him. And then there's the younger talent Detroit continues trying to develop. Derek Moore remains an intriguing addition because the organization clearly sees long-term upside there. DJ Wanham brings versatility. Trevor Nowaski continues fighting for a bigger role. The Lions are building layers across the defensive front, and honestly, that may be the smartest approach possible for a team trying to sustain success rather than chase one lucky season. But the reality is simple. Young players rarely develop in perfectly straight lines. Some break out immediately. Others need time. Some struggle with consistency. That's exactly why veteran depth becomes so important for contenders. Detroit doesn't need to ask a veteran signing to carry the defense. They only need another reliable piece capable of contributing when needed. At the same time, one of the more interesting developments happening around this roster involves Terrion Arnold and the way the coaching staff seems to believe in his long-term future despite some early concerns. Arnold openly discussed how intense Lions practices have become, and it says a lot about the culture Dan Campbell continues building inside this organization. Practices are designed to feel difficult because Detroit wants players prepared for high-pressure situations long before Sundays arrive. Arnold talking about learning from Jared Goff was another major detail that shouldn't be overlooked. Veteran quarterbacks expose weaknesses quickly. If a young cornerback can survive against experienced NFL route concepts during practice, it accelerates development faster than almost anything else. Arnold appears to understand that criticism and adversity are part of becoming a top defensive back in this league. The talent is there, the confidence is there, but now comes the hard part. Translating flashes into consistency. One of the biggest issues Detroit wants Arnold to clean up is discipline in coverage. Too many unnecessary grabs. Too many moments where panic replaces technique. That's normal for younger corners adjusting to NFL speed, but it becomes magnified on a team with Super Bowl expectations. The Lions need Arnold to become dependable snap after snap, not just occasionally show elite ability. Still, there's belief internally that he possesses the mentality to handle the pressure, and honestly, that matters a lot. Detroit has seen talented players fail before because they could not mentally process adversity, criticism, or setbacks. Arnold does not seem wired that way. He appears motivated by the challenge instead of overwhelmed by it. The comparison many fans quietly think about is how Jameson Williams matured inside Detroit's system. Early frustrations eventually gave way to visible growth and improved professionalism. The Lions hope Arnold follows a similar path, learning from mistakes, developing discipline, and eventually becoming one of the foundational pieces of the secondary. Meanwhile, the organization itself also appears to be evolving beyond just football. The situation involving Woodward Sports became another major talking point because of the ownership change that recently happened. Joey Namath acquiring majority ownership from Chad Johnson created a wave of reactions, especially from people familiar with the company internally. Many believe this transition could actually help the platform move in a much healthier direction moving forward. The criticism surrounding the previous leadership became extremely public, and there's now optimism that the environment around Woodward Sports could improve significantly under new management. For Lions fans specifically, that matters because Detroit sports media continues growing rapidly alongside the success of teams like the Lions and Pistons. A healthier media environment often creates stronger fan engagement, bigger coverage opportunities, and more consistent conversations surrounding the franchise year-round. And that's really the fascinating part about where Detroit sits right now. Everything around the Lions suddenly feels bigger, national attention is higher, expectations are louder, every roster move gets debated heavily because people genuinely believe this team has a chance to compete at the highest level. The front office now has difficult decisions ahead. Do they trust the current defensive line depth exactly as it is? Do they bring in another veteran pass rusher for insurance? Do they fully commit to youth movement or balance it with experienced contributors who can help immediately? Those answers are going to shape how dangerous this team becomes once the season starts. Because if Detroit gets stronger defensively while the offense continues operating at a high level, this team may enter the year looking more complete than ever before. And now the pressure becomes real. The Lions are no longer surprising anyone. Opponents will prepare for them differently. Every weakness will be targeted. Every young player will be tested. That's what happens when you transition from hunter to hunted in the NFL. What makes this entire situation even more intense for Detroit is that the Lions are entering a stage where patience inside the fan base is almost completely gone. Not because people are frustrated, but because expectations are finally real. For years, this franchise lived in a cycle of rebuilding conversations,